Hi guys, today we're going to show you how to break down a ATV, a Polaris ATV primary clutch. It's going to vary a little bit between some of the different models and years and things like this, so it'll be kind of just a general run through of everything of how to break down the clutch, rebuild it, and put everything back together. We'll also show you how to clean the clutches and inspect a couple different areas and what to look for. So we'll kind of do that. We've already got the clutch pulled off the machine. This is off like an earlier 500 Sportsman. But we're going to put it in our clutch compression tool. This allows us to pull out the primary clutch nice and easy. If you're not using a compression tool, the biggest thing is when you're taking this clutch cover on and off, and we'll show you in a second, you can damage that. There's a bushing right in the center here. And if you let it get caught off to one side or another, or if there's a lot of tension on it, it can damage that bushing. So we'll show you quick how we take them apart and the best way we found to do it. But you just crank this down a little bit to get some of the tension off it. Before you unbolt anything, I always take a marker and mark some X's on the covers so it's easy to see and line up, especially being that we're going to break down this whole clutch. And we'll show you how to do everything here. But first we got to get the spring out of here. Once you get the bolts out, it's a matter of unthreading this. Now when it's coming up nice and square and even. Whereas if you got, if you're trying to do it by hand, and especially only one person doing, you'll have one tight bolt and it'll get caught off. So you gotta just watch there. Once you get this off, I don't know if the camera can see or not, but there's a little bushing in here, and what will happen is if it's turned sideways one way or another, you can damage it. We'll pull the spring out here. Once the spring's out, we can show you a little bit better. This clutch, this is getting on the edge of being worn out. It's wobbling around quite a bit. You want it to move up and down freely, but if it gets too loose, it's going to move off to one side or the other and start binding up. Another thing you can do is you can actually bolt this back together. We'll put all the X's together with our alignment marks. You don't need 100% tight. A lot of times you can even hold it by hand, but if you just buzz one or two bolts in there, that kind of holds everything in place for what we're going to check for. And then what you can do is you can work this up and down as a unit, and then you can see how much it rocks. It's moving a little bit on the holding fixture here, but that's not horrible. But if it's worn a lot more than that, what will happen is it'll kind of turn sideways and it'll bind up on you, and then it won't go in and out. Like you can check it just by pushing off to one side and trying to push it up and down on it. Like right now it'll barely go. And that's what happens when it's on your machine. It'll just get worn out and finally it just needs to be replaced. So we'll show you how to break it down. So now we got your clutch cover, or the cover plate off. What we want to do is we're going to pull it out of the fixture here. And EPI sells a clutch holding fixture. It's part number 358B. It'll come in a little plastic case like this. Nice and easy to keep in your garage and stuff. What you want to do is it works best if you mount it in a vise. You can bolt it down to the ground, to the table or something, as long as it's something sturdy, because the clutch is torqued together anywhere from 200 to 250 foot-pounds. But this way right here, you can lock it right into a vise pretty easily, as long as you got your vise is bolted to something sturdy too. So let's break this down. Crank that in there. And then you also get this black threaded rod. Actually, and there's a silver nut and a silver washer in here. And what I do is thread the nut on just a couple turns. About that way, about the thickness of, you'll see your threads in here, and then throw the washer on here. And then you thread this down in there. And the clutch height will vary a little bit, and depending on what tools you need, you might need to screw this up or down just to get enough clearance for everything. But then it's just a matter of, it's 11/16 wrench. You don't have to go crazy, but just put a little torque on that so it doesn't spin free when you're taking the tools on and off. And then what we'll do is we'll set this clutch in here. And the main reason you want to use an actual holding fixture, because all ATVs will have these fins on the back. Some will be straight like this, some are actually curved. Our plate will fit either one. If you just put this part in a vise, it's pretty hard to hold at 200 foot-pounds. Or if you just put one or two little tabs on it, you take a good chance of breaking one of these fins off or breaking the whole clutch as a unit. So then you got to replace the whole thing. So that's the biggest benefit to using this and not damaging your clutch. So we'll just set this down in here. And then to hold it in place, you just thread this black thing down with the black nut down with the taper going down in the shaft. And it just holds everything good and tight so we can hold it and work on it. So a couple things we want to look for when you got your clutch apart or when you're working on it, is the wear. Like this one's got really worn weights. They shouldn't rock back and forth that far. That's usually a good sign that your hole in your clutch weight is oblonged out, or the weight pin is worn, or a combination of both. Another thing that I don't know if you'll be able to see or not, and once we get this part we'll show you better, but there's a roller in here and it's got some flat spots on it, and it's also missing, there should be some plastic washers on both sides. That's gone. And then another issue we're seeing is these little plastic buttons right here. That should be tight in there. Polaris wants you to run like a 0 to 2,000 spec on them. And this one's got like 20 some thousandths on this one side. So we'll kind of break that down and show you how to do it. There's a couple special tools you're going to need, and we'll kind of run through that. The first one, now some Polaris ATVs will have jam nuts. This particular one is a plastic one. A lot of them will have metal, and there's some that have none at all. So the jam nut tool, it's a 338 is our part number. If you have, this is most of the older Sportsmans and pretty much everything except for the newer 900 and 1000s. Once you get to the 900 and 1000s, you need the jam nut tool, the 578, and it almost looks like a castle nut on there, and that will take that nut off. And on this one, being it's plastic, they're not really super torqued on there. Sometimes you can even grab it by hand, which that you can work off. Sometimes you'll need a breaker bar, but it'll just come off. And it's just a plastic little lock nut just to help keep that from vibrating off. It is like a half moon shaped here, so if you get too hard on it, or if you're not pushing down or holding down on the socket as you do that, you can round that part out, and then the nut won't stay on there very good. So just kind of as you're doing that, especially if you've got to put a breaker bar on it, hold down as you turn it. And then the next tool you're going to need is EPI's number is a 341. It's a spider tool. And the older ones are silver like this. The new ones you get from us are going to be a gold plated. Same exact thing, just different coating or coloring on them. And what that does is you just slide that right over, and it's actually going to hook into these, so it locks onto your spider. This triangle shaped piece here, that's called your spider. That's going to hold your buttons and your rollers and everything else. So we'll see if we can break that down. And on this one you need a big breaker bar. And then a lot of times I use a cheater bar, like put a piece of pipe on here, and that helps take it off a lot easier. So sometimes they break these loose really easy. A lot of the newer, bigger machines with more horsepower, and a lot of the sleds will actually, they use like a green Loctite on here or red Loctite on some of them. So it does help if you actually throw a little bit of heat on here. Just got to be careful, especially if you're reusing the clutch parts, that you don't melt any of the plastic bushings or damage anything that way. So just throw a little heat right on these threads here, and that'll help you break things loose a little bit easier. But as you can see, it's threaded, so you just want to lift this up as you go, and as you turn it, you'll see the spider will start coming out of here, and once you get to a certain point, then it's easier just to hold the whole clutch up. Now you can see these are starting to fall out here. So what I like to do is, all kind of falling out on me here at the same time. I should have done it a couple turns earlier. You can just remove these if you want. But if you hold this part of the clutch up, and then you can turn it, and then none of those parts you won't lose any of them. Again, this is just kind of a quick overview. Just give everybody a kind of a general idea what you need to do to break down your clutches. We'll get this over here. Once we pull it out here, you can see with these buttons, they're worn, they fall right out. This one's actually been kind of beat up for a while in there. It should be a nice square edge like that. And then you have your rollers in here. There should be a plastic roller on both sides of that. If your clutch is in good shape, or you think it might be in good shape, the biggest thing you want to do is you want to spin your finger on there, make sure it spins freely, but you don't want it sloppy up and down. It shouldn't rattle up and down. It should be nice and tight on the pin in there. And then you should also have the washers. If you don't have the washers, you need to take them apart and replace those too. But we'll set that aside for now. This also allows you to see the weights in here. I'm losing some of these parts all over in here. But the weights, again, they shouldn't wobble around like that. They should be nice and tight. Usually, most of the time the weight's worn first, but then also your weight pin will also change up and go too. And this one actually has been so worn that this is the movable bushing right here. And for some reason it's actually coming out of the clutch. You can see how much it's moved there. And then obviously this clutch is worn and damaged. You always look for cracks and things like that. We'll rebuild this one to show you the process, but normally if you have a clutch like this, it's time to pitch it and go get a new one. Alright, so now that we have the movable part of the clutch off, one thing you always want to double check, and you can actually check this on your machine if your belt is off, or once you get it broke down, anytime, but most of the Polaris from like 2000 up have engine braking, or a lot of them that don't even have engine braking on the newer models have a one-way or two-way bearing in here. This one has EBS, which means it should turn one way freely, which these bottom ribs right here, it's going to turn free, and if you try to turn the other way, it locks up. A lot of the newer machines don't have these ribs anymore. It's just a straight thing. It almost looks like a shaft of your primary clutch when it's down, when everything's put together. It'll be nice and smooth, but the same process. It should either spin both ways or one way and lock up. The direction, all that is going to depend on what model and stuff. Some of the Polaris will turn the opposite directions than the other, so it's kind of hard to explain it all on this one. This one turns this way like it should. To remove this, like if yours was locked up or sticking and you want to change it, this one has a metal spacer right here. Just pull that off, and then it has this bearing right here. Now on some of the different models, you'll have a fiber or a metal washer on either side of this, but usually they should have something there, and that's just to keep the bearing from rubbing on the sheave. Like this one's been ground out and rubbing in on there. Same thing on this side, just to keep from grinding on the spacer and stuff like that. So when you do get them, there's parts and pieces in there that will fall out, so you don't want to drop them. If you are planning to reuse it, just be really careful, and especially on the newer ones that are smooth, it's really hard to tell which direction they go. So maybe put an arrow or a mark on it somehow, so however you pull that off, it goes back on the same way. Like this particular one's got some needle bearings inside of it. This just fell out of there. It'll do that if you move them around a whole lot. Then some of the newer ones will look a little bit different, but the same basic principle and idea. So on this one, we're going to just put this one back together. I don't have a new bearing for it right here, but if you just put the new washer on, you slide this back on just like you took it off. And then just make sure it's operating the way it should. Usually if you lose some of those needles or you bond something around, sometimes it doesn't work either. So then there should be another shim or another fiber washer there. Then you slide the spacer on. Some of the spacers will look a little bit different, though it might be a different height and width, but same basic process. And that's basically changing a one-way bearing. Pretty common on a lot of the Polaris for this to go out, and to change it, you do need that holding fixture, you do need the spider tool, and you might need the jam nut tool. A lot of people don't realize that you need those type of tools to break down, but you do need that for that process. Alright, so here we have, it's a complete primary clutch rebuild kit. On ATVs, it's going to rebuild everything in your primary clutch other than the one-way bearing and the washer on each side of that. But everything else that moves in the clutch, it'll cover and do. We'll kind of cut it open here and run through a lot of the parts. There's a lot of parts and little pieces in here, so just be careful when you open them. You don't lose anything. This big bushing, that's going to be on your movable sheave. That goes in your movable part of the clutch. This is on your cover plate, the plate that you moved in when you change the springs in and out. That's what the bushings is there. These are your weight pins to hold the weights in and the nuts. Then you'll have the 3 roller pins, and then you'll have the 3 actual rollers, which are, they look like a piece of metal, but there's actual fiber washer on the, or a fiber bushing on the inside of them. I don't know if the camera will pick that up or not, but there's a bushing in there. So you'll get 3 of those. You'll get 6 of these plastic washers that go on each side of the roller, and then you'll get the plastic buttons. Again, depending on the models, some of these sizes and shapes of these will change a little bit, but same basic principle of how to change them and how to work on them. These particular ones have like a rubber on the back side of them. Some will have that, some are just going to be a hard plastic. If you do that, the rubber goes on so that it's pointing in towards the pin, and we'll show you how to do that when we get going. But that's basically a kit that shows you all the parts and pieces that we need to replace on there, and we'll kind of start on the other end of the clutch and show you how to change them all. Alright, so starting to rebuild this clutch, what we'll show you how to do is, again, just a reminder, this clutch is junk. If it's like this, cracked around here, or if you have any deep dishes in it like this one also has, it's time for a new clutch. Just throw it away and get a new one. You don't want that coming apart at, when you're driving it and have shrapnel come flying at you. But we'll pretend that's not there. We'll show you how to push these bushings in and out. Obviously, Polaris makes a perfect tool to fit in here to change these bushings. We know that everybody's not going to have that, so we kind of went, back to the basic garage way of doing it, and we'll kind of show you guys how to do that. What I did is we just went around our shop and found a socket that fits in there, fits the bushing really tight and close, so we don't damage the new one pushing in, but also damaging pushing this one out. So this bushing has actually worked its way part way out already, but typically that would be tight up against this, but we'll push it out here. They are kind of, sometimes it does take a little bit of heat or if you add a little bit of heat, that'll make the process a little bit easier. But we're just going to put the socket in there. I like to use a press because it's nice and even and doesn't damage anything else as you're doing it normally. And we'll just kind of push it through. Flying through the bottom here, but as you're pumping down, just make sure if something seems weird, or as you're pushing down on this, make sure that your legs are fairly square on something level or not going to damage anything, or if you bind it up, that you're not going to bend or crack the clutch, because it is aluminum. A lot of times they're going to be old and used and abused a lot, so they can damage and crack easier than normal. So just be careful with that. But you just tighten this down there, and the bushing fell out. Here's the bushing that came out of there. It's pretty worn up. Typically what will happen, Polaris uses a couple different bushings, but there's a Teflon coating that's on a lot of them, and what they tell you is if there's more there's more metal showing than Teflon, it's time to replace the bushing, both on this and on the cover plate. Some are fiber, so on the fiber ones all you can do is kind of go by feel of it, and if they look really worn out or if they're really sloppy when you're sliding them up and down, then it's time to replace them. But then your cover's out here. Once you get this done, you're going to want to take a paper towel and some brake cleaner or some acetone, just kind of clean it up all real good. And if there's any sharp edges from pushing out, or if you dug into it with the side of the thing, just clean those up, get any burrs out of the way. And then we'll clean up the rest of this and work on the rest of it. Alright, so whenever you got a clutch apart, whether you got it fully broke down like this, or you got your spring out and just working on your changing spring and weights or something, always inspect your weights. You always want to make sure that they are turning free up and down. This one's all messed up. We'll show you why, and then make sure it's not wobbling right like that. It should be nice and tight. It shouldn't go sideways to side like that. What will normally cause that is if this will come out of here. There's two things. One, this should be a perfectly round hole. As you can see, it's kind of hollowed out, especially on this side here. And that just makes it rock back and forth. Sometimes you have weights that'll have bushings in them, and that fiber bushing might be worn out or totally gone. So then sometimes you can just replace a whole new bushing. If the metal is actually worn out where it's not round, then you got to get a whole new weight. The other thing that you can see, I don't know if you can actually see the profile of this or not. This weight should be the same diameter all the way up and down, just like this new one here. And then where the weight was grinding back and forth on this, it's got a deep cut in there, and that's also going to allow the weight to move back and forth. Anytime anything on near part of your clutch, it's either causing the clutch to hang up or wobble more than others, is this going to wear out the rest of the clutch that much more. It's going to hurt your performance and have you more belt wear and tear and stuff too. So once you get the weights out, inspect those. If they're good, you can clean them up, put them back together. One other thing to watch on the actual weight is where the rollers roll up and down. This one's actually in pretty good shape here. You'll see where it's shined up. That's where it's normally rolling back and forth. But if it's should be nice and smooth. If it's got bumps in it or grind marks, or if your roller sometimes wasn't rolling, it'll actually grind back and forth on this, and you'll just see some hard scratch marks and stuff in it. Then it's usually time to replace your weights and stuff that way too. Alright, so now we got the new bushing. We're going to push that in. We cleaned up this surface area. If there's any deep scratch or anything, make sure you get all the burrs and stuff off there. Polaris recommends use a green Loctite, a 609 on this particular model, and most models will tell you to do that. I have a colorblind friend that bought red and blue, but we didn't have the green, so I won't do it on there. But typically what you do is just put a real light coating on there, and we're just going to do this for demonstration. So, but basically what you want to do is you want to press this in there. When you're pressing down, you got to make sure that you're not going to damage the clutch face. So we got a piece of wood down there just to help that. And then again, the right tool is a Polaris tool, or if you have a bushing tool to install it and stuff. Otherwise, a piece of pipe or a socket can work too, as long as you don't damage the edges. Alright, so my little socket wasn't 100% right. It was kind of tilting one way or another. Again, it's not the perfect tool to do it, but we're trying to show you how some guys can do it without the actual Polaris tools. I actually have just a flat piece of steel laying around here. It doesn't have to be round, but that'll help keep everything square on there. Tighten it in. And obviously, to seat it all the way in, we might have to remove that, but we'll try it and see. Now it's going down pretty easy. So we're about as far as we can go there. We're going to have to take this out. And there's a little lip on the inside in here where you can see we got to go, a 1/16 of an inch or so more yet. So we'll try my socket now that's seated in there a lot better. Just to try to finish it up. Yep, now it's working. I think I'm pretty good all the way around. But best way to do is just pull it out and check. Yeah, it's seated all the way around good there. Alright, so now we got a brand new EPI weight in here. You can see the hole is nice and round. This is actually a machine hardened weight here. And we got a brand new weight pin that's the same size all the way through. It won't wobble around like the stock one did. and basically just put the weight in. And as you can see, it doesn't hardly move at all. That little bit of play is what you want. That's normal, so it can actually pivot nice and free, but it moves nice and free and square. Compared to this is the older one, and you can see how much that one's moving, and it'll actually at times get hung up in there as it's flopping through there. So put all 3 new weights in there, or at least clean up your old ones and inspect them. And then once you get to that point, we'll throw it on back on the clutch. I'm just going to put this on here real quick. So we'll slide this back on, and you can do this without the weights in there too. And it should, you flip all the weights up, you should see how it moves up and down nice and smooth. Sometimes this collar might move up and down as you're doing it, but everything's working nice and smooth and nice and tight there. And then we'll work on the spider, and this spider's going to be, what we need to do is all these plastic buttons fell out as we were taking it out. As you can see, they're kind of worn in different ways and different shapes and stuff. But typically you would have that in there. What we need to do is knock that pin out and replace this roller and the roller washers that are even gone, and that pin in there. So we'll show you how to do that next. Right, so the first step to replace these rollers and the pins and the roller washers and stuff is we got to tap the old ones out. Now this one's got a solid pin on there. Some Polaris will actually have a hollow pin in there, or they might be silver, they might be black. They come in a couple different sizes and shapes and stuff. What I like to do is just hold them on the edge of the vise at first. It's really easier if you got another person there to help you, but we'll try to do it one-handed here. And just kind of get the pin rolling. It's just kind of lightly pressed in there. Usually once you get it moving, and then it goes out the rest of the way. It's starting to move out a little bit. You can also note too, on this one I haven't touched yet, but usually the pins will be normally flush with the first part of that indent in there on both sides. So you kind of got to judge to where when you install them, where to be with them. But we'll finish taking this one back out. Again, you can use a press if you got one. You can kind of get it started doing this. I like to do that, and then I put it in a vise. You got to be careful. It's aluminum. You can break it if you over torque everything on it. And it goes into a balanced clutch. So you don't want to grind on it or do anything crazy with it. But just tap it out of there. They should come out. It's almost out. There we go. You're going to end up with just an empty spot here. This is your stock roller. There's actually supposed to be, remember the new one I showed you? It actually has a fiber bushing in there. This one is good and round on the outside, but the whole bushing is gone. So it was just flopping back and forth in there. And I don't know if you can see that or not, but that's going to just cause wear and tear down the road. Your brand new one is going to fit nice and tight. There's no slop on there, and it turns nice and free. So that's what we want to end up with. But when we install it, it gets a little tricky because you want to put the pin in there, and you also have to have a washer on each side of it, so it gets kind of tight. Usually the easiest way to do it is if you have the right size pin, you can stick this through and kind of line up the parts in the middle and at least get them started as you go. So sometimes these are going to be black, some of the OEM ones are orange. They might vary in color a little bit, but they all do the same thing. But you just put a washer down in there, put a roller down in there, and then get your second roller lined up, stick that through. Then it's a matter of just getting your stock pin put in place without losing track of the other ones. And it gets a little tricky. You got to make sure you don't damage that fiber bushing on the inside of it, and make sure you don't break those plastic rings as you're going. One way to kind of do it is if you can get in a vise, it's kind of hard to hold this and all that. But if you get it in a vise and tap it here, let's see if I can do that. Whoop. Get it in place, and then it's going to be kind of hard to do and talk about it and show it all at the same time, but and just give it a nice little love taps till it gets through. And that one's most of the way through now. See the pin's still sticking out a little bit here, so you just want to make that level. And usually your new pin will go on a little easier than the old one came out. Then when you're done, you want to make sure everything turns nice and free and that your washers are in there, that nothing's bound up and stuff. So this one's working pretty good. Probably can't see it in there. But then we'll just repeat that process for the other two. Alright, so here we got two done. On the second one, when we put this in, and it happens every once in a while, when we first put it in, the roller didn't want to spin. It was a little tight. If you just kind of work it back and forth a little bit with your hand, sometimes just jiggle around, it might just have a little piece of fiber or something locked in it or something. But if you work, just make sure before you put it back on the machine that everything's turning free. So these two are the new ones. You can see, it might be hard to see, but it's got the black fiber wash in there. They're nice and tight. They don't bounce around. They don't slide around like this one here. We're just going to throw this one back together, just show you differences. The other thing to notice and realize too is when you're putting this together, you want to try to keep the pins as located, as centered as you can on both sides. You want it sticking out the same amount because those will actually stop the button when you put that in. So if it's sticking out one side or another, that's going to screw up your buttons. Speaking of the buttons, what you do is on this particular model, it's got a rubber back on them. Some of them won't have that. They'll just be a hard plastic. But you just put the rubber part in. And you're just going to do that all the way around, and then we'll stick the spider back in. One other thing is I'm doing that too. I just took a clean brake cleaner on a rag and just wiped down these surfaces here so they're nice and clean and smooth. If that's really hogged out, or what you'll see with a machine with a lot of miles on it, it might be tight at the very top or bottom and worn out in the middle where you're normally riding at. If it's got too much wear there, there's not much you can do other than either rebuild it and live with it, knowing that it's going to wear out a little bit faster, or you're going to have to replace the clutch. But we'll put these spider buttons in. They should fit in there pretty much free. The biggest challenge is make sure you don't drop them and they roll across your garage floor and you got to look for them. So once you get them in there, you can start threading this one in. Once you get it threaded on, we made an X on here. I know I'm still missing two of the buttons. I'll show you a little trick. We put an X on there when we first started for alignment. Here's the X on the spider. You want to turn it so that this X is over here. It's lined up. That way you keep the balance and everything as close as we can after it's been rebuilt. And then you just want to pick up on this. And you'll have to kind of jiggle it and wiggle it around a little bit to get the buttons to go down in there. It's going to be a little bit snugger fit because it's the way they're together compared to the stock ones. But you just got to work them in. Once you get them in like that, then you just keep holding them up on that as you turn, and then you thread this on, and as it turns, it's going to thread itself down there. Now, if this isn't an EBS style clutch, one thing to watch is instead of the one-way bearing there's going to be a stack of washers and shims. You have to make sure that you put all those back in there, or that's going to change your belt spacing. The EBS clutches won't have that. The non-EBS will. So that's one thing to watch for. And then once you get that, we just need to torque it down and get it right, and we should be good to go. Alright, so we haven't torqued everything down yet. We just want to check it and make sure it's moving up and down and free. It should be a little snug because all the bushings and stuff are going to be new. But if it seems like it's really, really super tight, you might want to go through and just unthread it, check all your pins, make sure they're centered. If the pin's off to one side or the other, that's going to push a little bit harder on the button. and kind of bind up everything on you. So it should move fairly free. It'll be a little sticky right at first, but it should move free without much force and stuff. Obviously, it'll be a lot tighter than your old worn out stuff. And Polaris wants 0 to 2 thousandths tolerance on this for wear wise, so we all should be good there. And you can check that with, if you got a feeler gauge, just get a feeler gauge, stick it in there and see where you're at if you need to. And then what you're going to want to do is torque this down. We got it tightened down. And then you're supposed to torque this to 200 foot-pounds on this particular machine. Again, some of them will go up to 240, 250 foot-pounds. It's going to vary between different models and stuff. Usually to get that, you need a breaker bar. Most people aren't going to use a torque wrench like you're supposed to, so then you just want to make sure you get a good bite on it. And I'm actually moving it enough to where I'm moving the vise right now. But you want to get it good and solid there. You kind of use your judgment. If you use the same bar how you took it off, kind of put the same part of force on there to do it. Again, make sure everything's good and free. It's going to move. Make sure your bearings turning free when you're done before you torque everything, or when everything's torqued. And then if yours has the jam nut on it, again, it could either look like this. You might not have one at all, or it could look like a little cast nut. This one's just a little plastic one, so this one doesn't get torqued on hardly at all. In fact, most of them is just done by hand. You can just kind of push down on it, hold down on it, and turn it at the same time. Turn it by hand. If you go too crazy on it, you're just going to break the plastic one. If it's a metal one, you're going to have to use a breaker bar and tighten it up again and get it where it needs to be. But that one's good enough there. And so then we're done with the basic bottom half of the clutch right now. We'll show you how to change the cover bushing, which is going to be in here. That's this little bushing in here. Again, usually if it's a metal bushing, there'll be like a Teflon coating on the inside part. And Polaris usually says if you can see more metal than Teflon, it's time to replace it. Or if you put it on there and it's really wobbly, a good idea to just replace it. Let me grab. It looks like kind of copper on the outside, but it's got like a Teflon coating on the inside, that brown coating there. And as you can see, this one's all bright and shiny like copper. So time to replace this one. Some machines on the snowmobiles and some of the ATVs will have a retainer clip in there you got to knock out first, just to help kind of hold it in place. This one doesn't have that, so we're just going to take it over the press and do it before we get to the press. Basically what I found is I'm going to put it in the press and just press down on it here. Again, Polaris makes special tools to be able to do that. Not everybody's going to have that. So I found a socket that fits nice and tight in there. I like to use this end of the socket where the ratchet would normally go in, because it gives you a flatter surface normally. Sometimes on the sockets here it'll be beveled over, rounded over one way or another. And then being that we're going to push it straight down, if you just lay that flat on there, that bushing can't come out of there. So I find a piece of pipe or a socket. This one happens to fit right in there, and that way you can push down and the bushing will drop right down into there. If you're doing it on a vise, some people will put this on a vise and tap it on in and out with a hammer or something like that. Don't recommend using a hammer, but if you need to, you can get it done that way too. So we'll bring it over to the press and show you how to press it out. Alright, so we're just setting this in there again so the socket's underneath so it can push down in there. Put this one down in. And again, this should come out fairly easy. If you got to go crazy at it, you can add a little heat and that helps push them out a little bit easier too. But it shouldn't go hard. There you can see it's moving. And there it's out. There's that. And here's your bushing. What you want to do then is we'll take and clean this up real good with a Scotch-Brite and just a paper towel and some brake cleaner, clean it up good. When you get your new bushing in there, you don't want any brake cleaner on that, though that can damage that or any other chemicals. So just dry wipe these in anytime you're cleaning these. But we'll put the new one in and show you how to press that in. Alright, so now to get the new bushing in, we cleaned up the inside there. Another thing Polaris will tell you again is they'll tell you to put the green Loctite on there, which is a good idea. That helps hold it in place there. And there should be a ridge down in here to stop the bushing to go. Now if your bushing was totally out of your clutch and you're running it, I've seen where they actually completely worn that ridge out, and then you pretty much need to replace that clutch. But as long as the ridge is still there and the bushing will fit tight in there, should be good to go. Put green Loctite on there. My colorblind friend only bought me blue and red, so we're just going to push this in just for the video, show you how to do it. But you just put a thin coat of the green Loctite on there, stick that on, set it in there as even as you can. Take a plate. You can use the socket. I like to actually use like something flat steel, and I always usually set this on wood so I don't, have less chance of damaging or hurting anything. But I put that on there, and again, this should go fairly easy. If you got to force it, something's bound up or something's not right. But then just a matter of getting everything lined up and pushing it down as square as you can. Push that down in there, and it'll kind of bottom out. And then to get the final stop, I'll probably have to take that flat piece out. See here. Yeah, the bushing's got to go a little bit farther in there. You can see there's, again, about a 1/16 of a net gap or so. So just line up our socket. Again, you want, if you're using a socket or a piece of pipe or something, just be careful that you're not damaging the bushing as you're doing this. Or, hold everything as square as you can and get it done. Once you kind of feel it bottom out, again, that's not going to be super hard to go in. But just as that, it's in there. It's completely bottomed out against that ridge now. And now we got a nice new bushing in there. All right. So tippy at this point, everything's working good. You put your 3 weights in. We got the 1 weight in on this side over here. Where just to speed things up, we'll leave those out for now. But then you can pull out of the holding fixture. Set this aside. And we got a clutch compression tool here. Throw this in. And again, you got to remember we got the X marked here and the X marked here. Once you get all your weights, this is when you want to put all your weights in. Put your primary spring in, and then we got the X on here. Before I put the spring in, let me show you this. This bushing should move nice and smooth up and down, and it doesn't rock back and forth hardly at all. That's the way you want it, so it works just right. So now we can put the spring in, compress that down in there, line up the X's that you got on there. And some of the smaller springs, you almost don't need a compressor. On the bigger aftermarket ones and a lot of the newer stuff, they're getting tight enough where you have to do that. When you're tightening this down, especially with a brand new bushing, everything's going to fit a little bit tighter. So you just got to make sure when it starts to seat on that shaft that you got everything lined up properly. It's going right on there now. See the actual clutch shaft shooting through there. Once you get like that, then it's just a matter putting all your clutch cover bolts in. These are torqued to like 7 or 8 foot-pounds on this particular clutch. Again, that might vary from clutch to clutch. You see the clutch is working nice and freely up and down. And it's just a matter of putting these in. Now, like I said, when we disassembled it, if you don't have a tool like this that's holding everything square, if you got a buddy there helping you holding stuff, the biggest thing is have somebody compress it down with their hands like this, so the bushing is staying square, and then have somebody else tighten the bolts. That way you don't damage that new bushing in there. So once you get the bolts tightened up, just remove it out of the tool. And one step I should have showed you earlier when we had everything torn apart is how to clean your clutch face. Again, you can do that at any time. You can do it now. It's easier when the clutch is apart and it's not. You can move it around a little bit easier. But basically, what you do is, if you've got a Scotch pad like this, or emery cloth, or roll light sandpaper, you don't want to put any deep grooves in it, but you want to start from the outside you kind of work your way like this all the way around, and you're not going to put deep scars or anything like that in it. You're just kind of buffing off the rubber buildup, what we call the belt glazing. A lot of times will be really shiny and glossy. This will just get a dull finish and stuff. You go all the way around like that, go around a couple times, both sides of the clutch, and then also do your primary clutch. And then what you want to do is take some brake cleaner and a clean rag, wipe it down, and just keep wiping down until you end up with a clean rag. Keep going all the way around a couple times, and that'll give you a good clean surface so you get less belt slippage, more power to the ground for you. If you have any questions, give us a call.